Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together.
Hello, and welcome back to the show. From navigating the ups and downs of relationships to facing unexpected setbacks, be it in our careers, personal lives, or due to external factors, life is teeming with twists and turns that can really test our resolve. But perhaps with the right tools and skills, you'll not only weather these storms, but emerge stronger and more buoyant. So, in today's episode, we're joined by resilience coach Gina Vild to discover practical ways to build resilience. Formerly an associate dean and chief communications officer at Harvard Medical School, Gina is currently an author and speaker. She's the co-author behind The Two Most Important Days: How to Find Your Purpose and Live a Happier, Healthier Life. And additionally, she's writing her second book. So it's great to have her on the show with us today. Welcome to the show, Gina. How are you doing?
Thank you. Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to speak with you on this because, there are lots of resources online about, how to build resilience. But I think the most important thing is finding a route that suits you. It may not suit your lifestyle or what you're interested in, and that might cause you to lose interest in it, and it may not be necessarily that helpful to you. So, but before we get started on that, tell us about your background and what compelled you to pursue resilience coaching.
I am a communicator by education and training, and I've been a communicator in government, in the political world, in academia, and in healthcare for all of my career. And I love sharing knowledge with others. And I love being on top of the latest research and helping disseminate it into the world to make people's lives better. It's part of my purpose, which is very important for resilience and happiness.
Yeah, I love that so much. It's such a valiant cause and it really resonates with me as well. So tell us, in your experience, what are the ways in which self efficacy and resilience may contribute to one's happiness?
Well, I think one the before we talk about that, I would you be interested in my I have a survey that a questionnaire, a quiz that I've developed to help your listeners determine whether they are resilient. It's a 10 questions which I could share with you or not. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, so tell us more about this quiz and what that would help us to figure out.
Okay. So when you look at self efficacy, which is really about how you move forward, it's about your self belief, self confidence, your calm and control and ability to move into the world, the courage to take risks, to pursue meaningful goals, recover from setbacks. It creates a foundation of hope and agency, which is really important. And resilience is about the happy how you return to a state of happiness after you've experienced adversity in its many forms. And as you know, life doesn't spare any of us. So we all have to deal with difficulties and we all do it differently. So to understand how you handle challenges and difficulties, I have just 10 questions I can ask. And if you're listening and are interested, you can just jot the answers down and
Yeah, that's
it will help
wonderful.
you yeah, it'll help you sort of grade yourself, and so you'll know what your starting point is when we talk about this.
That's amazing. I love quizzes. Huge fan of quizzes. I love taking quizzes so much. So we'll leave the link to that in our show notes, so everyone can have a go at taking the quiz, and maybe you'll follow along. You can take the quiz while listening to this episode as well. So thank you for that, Gina. That was a great introduction to our topic for today. But before we get further into detail, I'd love to get to know you better. So this is Have You Met Gina? And my first question for you is, what is your favorite book?
Oh, you're asking someone who has been a voracious reader since I was a child. So that's extremely difficult. So I probably should say the book I wrote because that was a dream to write a book and to be published. We were published with a really good publisher and it was bought and sold in Australia, which is really fun. So I have Australian editions of my book, The Two Most Important Days, um, which is the book on happiness. But probably I love Joan Didion. Joan Didion, who is an essayist and who died not long ago, is one of my absolute favorite writers. Um, I read Sloane Crosley. Sloane Crosley has a book out. She's an essayist on grief, which I just finished. Grief is for People. And it's a deep, moving, thoughtful, and unusually funny, humorous book on loss. So I do love that. I have many, many books that I love.
Yeah, I love
I
that. And what
probably
about
I
movies?
probably own 2,000 books. I mean, I have books everywhere. They
Wow.
breed they breed in the night when I'm sleeping.
And what about movies? Are you an avid watcher of movies like you are with books?
Not as much, but I have my guilty pleasure is rom-coms. So anything with
Mm,
Julia Roberts, Love Actually, Pretty Woman, anything that is it's such a difficult time in the world that when I do watch films, I look more for escapism.
yeah, that's really fair.
Yeah,
And who doesn't love Julia Roberts? I mean,
right.
it's probably one of the reasons I loved Friends so much because she was in it. But
Yeah.
as for podcasts, what are you listening to at the moment?
Well, this podcast should certainly is near my top of my list for being one of my favorites, but a podcast that I highly recommend, and I actually piece it out for myself so I don't listen to it all at once, is Anderson Cooper, who is a CNN anchor, on air person, journalist. He has a podcast called All There Is on grief. And it's so beautiful. His mother was Gloria Vanderbilt. And when she died, he started going through all of her things and it prompted a podcast. And he talks to people, famous and not famous, about how they manage grief and how they move through it and what is that experience. And it is absolutely mesmerizing.
Wow,
So
that's
highly
really
recommend that.
interesting.
Yeah.
I love that they have that multifacetedness of like interviewing both people who aren't famous and famous as well. Um, and yeah, that sounds like a really interesting premise. So thank you for sharing that. My next question for you is: has there been someone that you've looked up to either in your personal life or your professional life?
Oh, many. I was thinking about this earlier. It's hard to pin it down because I think in life we should all have a mentor. And I have had many mentors. And mentors are people, of course, who take a chance on you and who believe in you and they want to short circuit your learning process. And so I would say a number of mentors from my very first mentor who is not with us any longer, Bill Randall, who just helped me believe in myself. Margie Pizzuti was another one who took a chance on me and hired me for at a very young age for a job I had to grow into. And I'd had amazing mentors.
Oh, that's really sweet. It really just takes a few people to believe in you, to get you going, you know. And has there been a course or a class that you've taken that has stuck with you to this day?
Oh, most likely my English classes. I was a liberal art major, and we used to laugh and say we never really graduated. We just rolled out of college because we were so well rounded. But I really loved English. And I actually, there's my English teacher from high school, Miss Jerry Cafton. and that was a very long time ago. Very long time ago. We are still in touch and friends, and I just love her. And she has been very interested in the book I'm writing now on resilience. And I sent her, as an aside, a couple sections I had written, and she said, "Do you know you're misplacing your participles?" Which I love because I haven't thought about dangling or misplaced participles in a very long time.
Yeah, I love that so much. It sounds like you've really great relationships there.
Yeah.
And I feel like we got to know you a little bit better. So now let's move on to talking about some practical ways to build resilience. And for starters, I would love to know what your definition of happiness is.
So happiness, I I think of happiness as a byproduct of being present in your life and having a purpose. It's a moment of peace and feeling good about life and about yourself. And I will distinguish that from how I think about joy, because I think of joy as an intense but temporary feeling of delight. So, can you think of something that made you happy versus something that gave you joy? And then I would also clarify that bliss is the whole package. Bliss is when you're feeling connected to a larger world and to others. And it's a time and a period of total being and abundance. So, is that understandable? Like, can you think of a time when you felt happy versus joyful versus
Yeah,
blissful?
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think joy, I get from this is a guilty pleasure one, but I get from having wicked wings, which are a KFC item. They just have really crispy skin, and that it's just unparalleled. And it's really cheap too. So I feel joy when I have that. And then bliss is when I get to interact with cats. Um, Multiple cats would be even better. Happiness is kind of like it really depends on what's going on in my life. But I think yeah, I think of happiness as kind of the overall package, like um has there been an extended amount of time where, you know, I don't know how to explain this.
So I have a little shortcut. When I think about it, I think about happiness is the road you walk on and you're paying attention. So you feel happy for the experience, right? For the experience of walking and looking. And joy is seeing the beautiful landmarks. Something may create a sense of awe in you, and that's the joy. And then bliss is just overall feeling of gratitude for the journey. Does
Yeah, that
that?
makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, for sure. And what
Yeah.
about self-efficacy and resilience? How would you define these two concepts?
So it's interesting because I never thought about self-efficacy in the way that I know you're raising it. But self-efficacy, I think, as I was saying earlier, it's that sense of confidence and belief that you can move forward and control your destiny, and that happiness and this is really important, and I firmly believe this, happiness and resilience, because they're very closely connected. And I wrote a book on happiness, now I'm writing a book on resilience. They're very connected, and they are about feeling it's a choice that you make. You choose happiness, you choose to be resilient. And right before I joined you on this podcast, I was chatting with a friend who's just gone through the death of someone in her family, and she's really grappling with the grief. And I was trying to talk to her about allowing herself to feel the grief, but knowing she will have to choose to move beyond it. And I'm sure you all, when you think about people who are resilient and people who are not resilient, I'm sure you know people who just get stuck for years sometimes over something that may have happened, a job loss that may have occurred, or a relationship that went bad. And some people are challenged to move beyond that pain, and they repeat it by thinking about it, and they make it live in their head, and they feel those emotions repeatedly. And self efficacy is moving through that and being able to see things for what they are, learn from them, and then pursuing meaningful goals to try to recover from the setbacks. It's your
Yeah.
agency over your situation.
Yeah, for sure. And in full transparency, I mean, I have been at that point where, I'm just ruminating in these negative feelings and not quite bouncing back. But I was also curious to know, resilience is often described as that ability to bounce back from life challenges. But is there more to it? What do you think about that?
Well, so people who are resilient, the name of my next book is going to be Buoyant, because if you think about buoyancy, it's ability to ride the rough waters of life, right? So self-efficacy is like choosing to move forward. Resilience is really grappling with the issue. What have you learned from it? What do you have to accept from it? What do you need to move forward, right? You ride the waves of life, and there's no escaping difficulties. So, there's job loss, there's aging, there's death, there's divorce, there's setbacks, there's financial woes, there are challenges with children. No one escapes it. If you're living fully, you cannot escape the challenges of life. And so, why is it some people rail at life and the unfairness of it, and other people are more accepting and they say, barns burned down. Now I can see the sky, right? So that's to me the fascinating part of resilience is what makes someone manage it or not manage it well and carry it with them. And somebody else says, all right, this happened. This didn't feel good. How do I grieve it? How do I think about it? Can I learn something from it? And how do I move forward? And that to me is what resilience is.
Yeah. And what are some common misconceptions that you've heard about happiness and resilience?
Well, can I talk just first a little bit about happiness? Because I think that is important to frame first.
Mhm.
Because, yeah, is that all right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So everybody wants to be happy. Well, if you were to search on Amazon, there are probably 200,000 books on happiness in some capacity. So why do people want to be happy? Like, what drives them? What motivates them? Why are they even thinking about it? So, in part, people who are happy, they have a positive feedback loop. So, you want to be around happy people because they radiate happiness and they make you happier, right? So, I'm sure you can think about people at work or in your personal life, and you think about people that are just overtly happy and you want to be around them because it's infectious. People who are happy they have better relationships. People who identify as being happy, they have better relationships and they have a richer sense of community because they value others and they have a tremendous respect for the interconnectedness of life. And it's actually interesting. I was at Harvard, as you mentioned, for a number of years, and at Harvard's Business School, they did a study which showed people who are happy are more creative. They have far more creative ideas and new ideas than the people who identify as not being happy or as people who are unhappy. And people who are happy are also creative. They're very creative. So, we have this myth that misery is a muse, right? Like the great artist
Yeah.
wrote from pain. It's actually not true. The great art, the great creativity comes from happiness. And here's the best part, and this is true for resilience and also for happiness. Happy and resilient people actually live longer. It's true. If you are happy and you are resilient in managing life, you have a lower incidence of cardiac disease. It cuts cardiac disease by half.
Well, that's all
Um,
I need to know to want to be happy.
and that's it. And people, this is also really critical. And I just wrote a chapter about this yesterday on resilience, but it's true of happiness. People who are happy have more friends. And people who are resilient, they have a much broader and interconnected social circle. And people with more friends and good friends, meaningful friends, they have lower blood pressure, a better immune system, less depression, and less insomnia. So when you look at that, there's a lot of reasons to strive to be happy. And now I'll tell you why you can be happier and more resilient. And there, I actually, well, let's talk about happiness first. So, Martin Seligman, who's a famous social scientist, and others did a study. And what he showed is that everyone has a set point for happiness. And I call that the happiness quotient. We all have our own happiness quotient. And where do you get that? Like, what is it? Right. So, 50% of your happiness quotient is inherited. You get it from your family. And so that's your set point. And and what that means is that if something happens in your life, like say you have a baby, you'll be joyful, but within 3 months you're going to return to your set point. Or you lose your job and you're unhappy. Within 3 months you're going to return to your set point. Whatever happens in your life, you will have a variance of how you feel for a short amount of time, but you always return to your set point. And there are two exceptions to this. Um, One is if you lose a spouse, and that's a much longer recovery period. And the other one is if you win the lottery. Only if you win the lottery, you're happy for that set 3 months. But lottery winners who maintain their sense of happiness, do you have any idea what they do and why they can elevate their happiness quotient?
No.
No, they give the money away. They're
Oh, I
they're
love
gen
that.
they're generous and they're charitable. And that's called your hedonic adaptation, where you always return to your set point. So now we have 50% left, right, for your happiness quotient. 50% is inherited. And it's good for everyone who's listening to think about, what did you learn about being happy and resolving conflicts from your family, from your parents? Now, another 10% of your happiness quotient is your living conditions. And that means they have to be satisfactory. You don't need to have the largest mansion. And there are people who are very happy who live in the slums of Calcutta. You just have to be satisfied with the conditions with which you're living. So that's 60%. Now, the last 40%, and here's the good news, this is why happiness is a choice and resilience is a choice, because there are voluntary acts you can do to boost your happiness quotient. And if you look at resilience, there are two studies that have been done on this same topic for resilience, and the numbers are a little bit different. Your set point for resilience is 30 to 50%. So it's a little bit lower than it is for happiness, but the studies have been done. And what they show you is that there's room for you to expand your ability to rebound and to be happier.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So tell us about what the common challenges are that people face when it comes to building resilience and getting back to that set point.
So they have to learn a variety of things. They have to practice behaviors and thought processes. And I can talk to you about resilience. And they're similar, but they're different for happiness and resilience. So let's first talk about happiness because it's shorter and it's a little easier. So for happiness, we think of it as forgiveness for others, friendship, and gratitude. So, not holding grudges is very important. When Nelson Mandela was released from prison and he was asked if he was angry at his captors, he said no, because holding on to resentment is like holding on to a hot coal and thinking it's going to harm somebody else. So, right? So think about that. If you are upset with someone, and we've all been there, all of us, right? How does it serve you to hold on to the anger? Because the person you're angry with doesn't know or doesn't care that you're angry, and you're ruminating, as you said, and you're revisiting those issues. So being able to forgive is truly critical to living a life that is happy and resilience too. It is true for resilience, but it's definitely true for happiness. And I always say to people when I'm giving talks, if you can think of one person who hurt you and think about what it would mean to say, I forgive you. In Lebanon, where there are some, they've had a horrendous history, a painful history, there is something called a forgiveness garden. And there's also a website that I haven't looked at in a long time, but it's called, I think, Project Forgiveness or the Forgiveness Project. And people post and discuss some of the most difficult things they could ever forgive. And it's really interesting.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
from my experience, forgiving someone is a lot easier when, the perceived acts of harm, perceived or real, whichever, um, when those acts of harm have been long history or further off than like just right there and then and ongoing, if that makes sense. If it's ongoing, it's a lot harder to think about forgiveness. So what is your advice for um trying to find it within yourself to forgive when the act is kind of ongoing?
So that's a very interesting question. And it's actually a very different question. Um, I think of it as a different question. So one of the things that I have always said, and I just wrote a little book for my children, um, that they asked me 100 questions and I answered 100 questions, and then they were surprised because I wrote this as opposed to, a little volume. But I think one of the fundamental principles of life is this: know your worth. And once you know your worth and you totally embrace your worth and how do you deserve to be treated, that solves the problem of whoever is not acting appropriately with you, because you can stop it or you can address it. And you don't address it in anger. Maybe if it's, someone in your personal life, or, a lot of times people can use humor as a weapon. It can be very hurtful. And to be able to say, that was hurtful. Did you intend to hurt me? Because that's how this felt. Or if it's in a relationship you're having, being able to have very clear boundaries, if it's a friend or a partner or a spouse, knowing your worth helps you put those boundaries in place and you say, there are no exceptions to this. This is not okay for you to talk to me like this. Or when you say X, this is how I feel. Or what was your intent in saying this? So I think in terms of forgiveness, that issue of somebody who's repeatedly hurting you, I think we all have to take ownership of that and address it. And to me, I think it's so simple when you just ask yourself, what is my worth and how do I deserve to be treated? And I'll give you an example. Like I have somebody I know who is, a little bit younger than me, and she's dating and she's gets ghosted and then he comes back, and so we spend a lot of time talking about this, like what to do. And he wrote again or he called again and he did this. And I say to her the same thing: know your worth. And if your worth says, I deserve to be treated better than this, you're going to know what the answer to that question is. It can't happen a third and a fourth time because your worth will put it all in perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about what contributes to building resilience, but I'm also curious to know what factors may hinder resilience. So, could you talk us through that a little bit?
Yes. The things that we do and they're choices we make that hinder our resilience is by not doing things that we really should do. And so I'll put it in the positive rather than the negative. So this is how I think about it. We refuse to accept things that require acceptance. And we need to do better at accepting what happens in our life. Sometimes, and Joan Didion wrote about this, sometimes lights don't turn green for us. Sometimes things flip upside down. Life doesn't turn out the way we want it to turn out. And accepting that and saying this is part of life and moving on. That's one. Um, Not having gratitude, because when you are struggling with a problem or a loss or a disappointment or a setback, sometimes like laser light is on what what happened, where we can look around us and think about gratitude, right? And what do we have to be grateful for in our life? And, right now in the world, we're having financial issue crisis, and there's a lot of chaos, and in our country there's a lot of partisanship, and it's very difficult. And I think about that in the context of resilience, and we can do what we can do, but we also can focus on the things in life that are good, and that's gratitude. And there are a lot of ways to practice gratitude, right? So when you practice gratitude, you know, there are studies that have been done on having gratitude practices. And a gratitude practice, when you put it in writing, it actually will change your ability, your mindset within a short amount of time. And so every night, if you're just jotting things down in a journal, that's a very good gratitude practice to have. Um, if you with your children, if you have children, if anyone is listening has children, like when my children were little, after we read a bedtime story, I had a little book next to the bed, and I would say to them, "Tell me one thing that made you happy today that you were grateful for." And they were little, they couldn't even write, but it would be like the dog or a friend or the blanket or something. But I wanted that mindset to be positive. And so that's another way to do it. One time I also had an exchange with a girlfriend who lives in another city far away. And every night we committed to each other that we would write our three gratitudes and send them to each other. And isn't that like a fantastic idea? Because if she didn't hear from me or I didn't hear from her, we would reach out. We had an obligation, right? We had an obligation to write our gratitude. So that is really important, really important.
Yeah, I love that so
Um,
much.
and on the acceptance, I didn't use this as an example, but journaling is a really good way to get clarity on your life. So when you want to practice acceptance, writing a journal or, saying I'm sorry to somebody or just letting the pain go, choosing to let the pain go is really critically important.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I found that really helpful as well in any kind of, I guess, um, at adversity that I faced in life to just like kind of write a letter to whatever situation that I'm facing and kind of get my thoughts out on there. It's not exactly traditional journaling by any means, but for those people who don't feel like they can journal every single week, it doesn't have to be that regular all the time, but journaling during adversity can really help you get your thoughts out there. But I'm also really curious to know, a lot of people do struggle with that negative self-talk, which may hinder resilience. And I'm wondering, are there any practical ways to reframe those negative thoughts?
yes. And this is really interesting that I think the single most important way to deal with resilience, and I'm researching this now, is learning how to manage your thoughts. And there is a book I have recommended in a number of talks by Dr. David Burns, and it's a workbook. It's a book, and then there's a workbook. And basically, it walks you through a process of learning how you think. And he identifies, and this is his work, not mine, but I think it's really important. And so ask yourself, as I just tell you what the 10 different categories are, which of these might you do? Because once you know what you do, you can change the process. So, for instance, are you an all or nothing thinker? Right? There's no middle ground. Things are wonderful or they're terrible. We all know people who do that, right? Maybe we do that. Do we overgeneralize? So, do we make conclusions based on a single event? Someone slights you in a meeting, so everything is bad, or you make assumptions about that person or about the process going forward. Mental filtering. Do we only focus on negative details and ignore the positive? So, if you're having an annual review and you get good feedback and bad, do you walk out of the meeting with only the negative thoughts in your head, or do you also try to balance it with the positive? Do you discount positive things? And we all know people who do this and say, "You look wonderful today," or "What a great report you wrote." And we diminish ourselves. We're like, "Oh, this," or "It wasn't anything," or "It was easy." We don't own and feel good about the process. Or do we jump to conclusions? Do we make assumptions with no evidence? Like mind reading. Do we assume people are thinking negatively about us? Right? Do we do that? Do we sort of try to read in when there's no information, or fortune telling, predicting bad outcomes without proof? He also writes about magnification and minimization. So, do we blow problems out of proportion, or do we refuse to see them for how big they are? Another is emotional reasoning, believing that how we feel is the reality and not have clarity between what we feel and what is happening. Or should statements, holding rigid rules for yourself and others. Somebody should treat me like this or should do this. And so then there's always an upset. Labeling and mislabeling, defining yourself or others in extreme. Everything is wonderful or awful. And then personalization and blame. Do we take responsibility for things outside of our control, or do we blame others? And once you learn how to manage your thoughts, it can be life changing. And I'm happy to give you one example of how I did this with a problem I was dealing with.
Please
Um,
do.
Is there time? Okay. Um, so I have had a lot of loss in my life. I've had a lot of loss. I lost my parents within 2 months, very young, and a heart attack and stroke. And I lost my oldest sibling, my brother, to cancer when he was in his 40s. And I have lost other people. I had a big family. There's been a lot of illness and a lot of death. And I really struggled, which was something nobody knew, with hypochondria, because I covered it very well. And it's actually a funny story, but I could fall down rabbit holes of, basically taking these conclusions based on nothing and spinning rabbit holes out of them and then falling down the rabbit hole. And when I was hired at Harvard, and it was my first week, and it was very exciting, and I was about to meet the faculty for the first time. I was going to a faculty council meeting to give a presentation. I read something that triggered my hypochondria, and I started sweating, and I started thinking, "Oh my god," I fell down that rabbit hole, and I was looking at the clock, and I was like, "This cannot be happening. I have to go give one of the biggest presentations of my career to date in, like, 10 minutes." And I had the realization that in the last minute, nothing had changed except my thoughts. And it was such an aha moment, and I thought, I didn't have an accident, I didn't have a diagnosis, I didn't have a problem. My thoughts had changed, triggered by something I had read. And so I decided I would take the thought and put it on the proverbial corkboard, go give the talk, and come back and take it down and restart my my panic attack later in the day. And I n- I never had another I've never had another bout of it, ever, because the realization that your thoughts are something you choose, and you're putting them in your head, and you can choose to take those thoughts out of your head, right? And it is I think one of the single most important things you can realize is that your thoughts are your choice and you're choosing what thoughts. It's like a video, it's a television, right? You've got your television out. What are you going to watch? Are you going to relive old bad memories or happy memories? And let me give you one little exercise right now that is life changing. The single fastest way to change your thoughts is to relive your happy memories. So when I was young, I had a practice at night when I was a little girl, like really little. I would think through before I fell asleep something good that happened during the day. And as I got older, I was still doing it. In middle school, maybe some boy I like said hello to me and I'd fall asleep thinking about that. Fast forward, I'm much older. I'm at Harvard at my desk and a study comes across my desk that shows people who relive happy memories are happier people. So when I started writing the book, I tried to find that study that I had accidentally stumbled on something as a child that actually has scientific efficacy now. And I found there are so many studies that show this. So if you are ever in a blue mood at work or with your friends, just relive a happy memory. And I'm sure you can imagine you're sitting with your girlfriends and it's like, remember the time we did this? Or telling a funny story, and those happy memories boost your adrenaline and actually change your thought process.
Yeah, and that's actually also why experts recommend people in romantic relationships to revisit their earlier days when they're happy, revisit the happy memories, and it really helps with the relationship too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you are somebody who is prone to negative thoughts and you now are conscious of them, there is the practice you probably heard about where people wear a rubber band on their wrist. And when the negative thought comes, you pull, you let the rubber band hit you and that breaks the thought pattern. And the other thing to do is to have a daily affirmation, and those are great. Everybody should have a daily affirmation. And we have one in our book, but you write your own is really the best way to do it. And in the morning when you wake up and at night, actually, well, I'll tell you, at night when you go to sleep, a lot of people recommend you do your daily affirmation then, because when you're sleeping, the filing cabinets in your brain are organizing the events of the day. And so that becomes part of the events that get organized. And my co-author of The Two Most Important Days, he's just brilliant, Sanjeev Chopra. He always said, in the morning, your first thought should be a positive thought because it will frame your day. So all of that is like ways to manage your thoughts and to catch
Yeah.
yourself when you're thinking negative thoughts.
Yeah, well, that's been really, really useful and very insightful for me. I think it's really interesting. But I also love to know what are some cases where pushing through adversity may become unhealthy when pushing through adversity by simply just trying to reroute your brain to being positive all the time. When can it get unhealthy?
So I think of that in two ways. So when the obvious one is when we're dealing with grief, and some people do not deal with grief as well. And all the experts on grief, and I am not one, but I am a student of grief and trying to understand it, says you have to absorb and deal with your pain. And Elizabeth Gilbert, the writer, she writes so eloquently about grief and she talks about how you have to honor it. And when it comes in your door, you bow to it and you let it do its work with you. And then it will go and it will come back and it will happen again, but it'll come back with less frequency. And for anyone who's dealt with a loss, you know that to be true. And the worst thing to do is just bury those thoughts and not process them. And maybe it's not a death, maybe it's a relationship that ended. And, grieve it, feel what you need to feel. And I have in my book one of my principles of resilience is how do you cultivate a new path? How do you move forward? And how do you get beyond those thoughts, with after you've processed them? And I'd like to share it if that's okay because I actually did this. I went through a divorce after I was married. It was something I chose, but it was extraordinarily painful for a range of reasons, after 28 years. So I was well into thinking I was gonna be married forever, and a lot of things became revealed, and I wound up saying, "I know my worth, and I am not staying." But it was a struggle, a real struggle, and there was a point where I didn't know how to move through the pain, and I thought, "I know what I'll do. I will ask" my friends all had advice. "I'm going to ask the smartest person I know how to get through this." So I did. I asked Google, and I asked Google how to heal my broken heart. And the first search that came up was this advice, and it works for jobs, it works for relationships, it works in so many different ways, and it was extraordinary. Google said the first thing to do is write a goodbye letter. And so I sat on the porch one night with my computer and I poured my heart into everything that was over, all the things I thought that would never be again. And that's hard because it's you're taking your grief and your loss and you're feeling it, you're internalizing it, you're putting it in writing, which is also a very meaningful way to process thoughts. And just cried my heart out for an hour or longer and all the things that I thought were going to be and retirement and grandchildren and being raising them together and all of this. I said goodbye to the hopes and the dreams and the expectations for my long-term marriage, and I was exhausted. And then my best friend Google, the smartest person I know, had part 2, and part 2 of that was to write a hello letter. So they my friend Google said, "Wait a couple days, and then you write a hello letter." I sat down on the porch, my computer, and I started imagining and envisioning a new future. But I didn't know what it would look like because I was still coming out of a dark place. But I started writing and I thought, well, maybe I'll get to travel now to places I wanted to go where he didn't want to go. Maybe I, can organize my house. I changed a lot of the art in the house. I took one of my favorite paintings that lived in the bathroom because he didn't like it and moved it into my bedroom. But I started envisioning what a new world and a new life would look like, and that maybe it would even maybe unimaginable given my age at the time, I would find love again, which I did. But the purpose of the exercise is processing and expelling the grief and then opening a window. So a door had closed, and you allow yourself to open a window and to envision a new future and to manifest a way forward. It's so
That
powerful. I can't even tell you how powerful it is.
that sounds like such an effective and pretty fun, engaging activity too. I'm going to start applying it for a lot of things.
Right.
So
Say
thank you for
hello and
yeah,
say goodbye. Yeah. Say goodbye and then hello.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I feel like these are things that we want to think about, but sometimes it's really hard without the prompt. So that's so useful. And I'm definitely going to incorporate that for the future. So thanks for sharing that with us, Gina. It's been such a lovely time talking to you about this and really eye-opening as well. Now let's talk about some of the day-to-day application of what you just shared with us. So, what is a habit that you recommend practicing to develop resilience, especially for our happiness?
I would say, well, some of the things I just talked about, but also find your sense of purpose. Like, what is your why? People who know their why can endure any how, correct?
Mhm.
So, what is your purpose? And if you don't know and your purpose doesn't have to be grand. You don't have to start a foundation where you're giving millions of dollars away. Your purpose may be gardening or it may be paying attention. And if you don't know your life purpose, you're aimless. So I would suggest anyone who's listening, write down what you think your purpose is. And if you don't know, I'll give you an exercise. For 1 month, get index cards and every act you take, everything you do, write down what it is. And number it 10 through 1. 10 if you loved it, 9 if you loved it a little bit less but still liked it, and grade all the activities that you do and what gives you joy and what makes you feel good. And somewhere and then throw all the cards away except 10, 9, and 8, and somewhere in there is your purpose. So I would say
Yeah, that's
that's
really.
one of the
Mhm.
yeah,
And would you say that this may change or need revisiting over time?
it does. It does. I gave a talk last month to a group of retired nuns who wanted me to talk about purpose. And I thought, my gosh, some of them worked in leper communities and they were teachers. And I thought I should be sitting at their knee learning about purpose. And I realized they were retired now and our purpose changes at different points in our life. So it's good to
Yeah.
refresh that and revisit that.
Yeah.
And
And what would you say are some of the obstacles or struggles that people may face in trying to do this? I imagine some people would probably run into, not being able to write all 10 down.
well, you don't need oh, no, you're not writing 10. You're making an index card for every activity, and then you rate
Mm,
your activities. So if, like, say you took a group of children, grandchildren to the zoo or somewhere, you rats on a card. You made dinner. Maybe you love cooking, maybe you don't love cooking. That could be a 10 or a 1. But you go through all your activities and then you rate, are you doing what gives you joy and what brings you pleasure? And you try
right.
to put more of that in your life, the 10s, the 9s, and the 8s. You try to get rid of the things you don't enjoy doing as much.
Yeah,
Does that
that
make
totally makes
sense?
sense. Yeah, 100%. Um, I love that so much. I think it's really interesting to just also like write them down on a piece of paper because sometimes, you have it stored in your head, like, oh, I really like this activity, I really like that activity, but it's really abstract. So putting them down on a piece of paper kind of helps to materialize it almost, and you can touch and feel it in a way, which I know it sounds a little bit yeah, it doesn't sound very like scientific or anything like that, but it does sound like it would help you to um just it would help to just like put it in the real world if that makes sense rather than living in your head. Um
Right. And
so
and
yeah.
the index cards make it even easier because you can just put aside the ones you don't want and you can study the cards that you real things you really and maybe you're writing or maybe you're doing something with music, and somewhere in there you will find your purpose.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love that so much. And thank you very much for sharing all of that with us today. I've had such a good time talking to you about this. But now let's move on to the open mic segment. And this is where you have the chance to talk about anything that you're passionate about. And it doesn't have to be related to this topic, but if you want it to be, we are not going to stop you. So the floor is yours, Gina. Take it away.
Oh my gosh, what my open mic. Let me think. So I guess I could talk about gardening because that is actually a form of happiness and resilience, and it's a personal pleasure, and it gives me relaxation and joy. But I think gardening is a metaphor for you see things wither, you see things die, and you see new life. And it also is a metaphor for how you can tend to life, to things that are important, and you can help shape them. So I love that. I love gardening. I love reading.
Oh,
I
yeah.
love
I
knitting.
imagine.
I love knitting. Do you knit?
Yes, yeah, I feel like the knitting and the gardening kind of comes from a place of like you're creating life almost. I don't garden myself because I don't have the space to do it, but I have like regrown spring onion, and it's always so fun to see it sprout and just um, yeah, it's just really fulfilling.
Yeah, and knitting is wonderful because like you said, I didn't think of it that way, but you are creating life. You're taking a thread and you're creating a scarf or a sweater or something beautiful, a thing of beauty. Like immersing yourself in beauty, whatever it is that you feel is beautiful. Maybe it's nature, maybe it's, I don't know, collecting cars or whatever it is that gives you that sense of being immersed in beauty. Sometimes just going to an art show or a museum. But knitting does it.
Yeah.
Knitting is actually very therapeutic. we didn't talk much about that piece of it, but meditation and presence is really important. And knitting does bring you into that place.
It definitely does. It really grounds you, and it helps to regulate your emotions, your thoughts a little bit. So that's a really good practice too. So thank you, Gina, for joining us today. If our listeners want to find out more about you and what you do, where can they go?
Well, I actually welcome emails because I am also looking for people to interview on resilience if they have stories to tell. And my email is gina.bild@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook and it's open. So I'm on Facebook. I'm on all the social media. And I actually have a website, two mostimportantdays.com.
Amazing. We'll link those in the show notes along with the quiz that Gina mentioned at the start of the episode. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.